beginning to understand that we should spend more time in our imagination. And I don't necessarily mean that in the sense that we should just spend all of our time just daydreaming about different things and just imagining different scenarios, especially the ones that are negative, but I really mean that in the positive sense. In the sense that we should almost imagine, we should spend a lot of time in our imagination, not necessarily imagining what we don't want to happen, but imagining what we do want to happen. Because, I feel like so often we tend to almost look externally for the things that we give ourselves internally. We tend to look externally for feeling a certain emotion. We tend to, at least in my personal experience, we tend to watch people live the lives that we wish that we had, especially on social media and different platforms like that. And I think so often all we end up doing is that we end up consuming a lot of negative content. We end up seeing a lot of content that makes us compare ourselves to other people. We tend to see a lot of content that honestly just ruins our own self-image and ruins who our own self-concept and who we think of ourselves as. So I'm really just starting to understand that we should spend a lot more time in our imagination. And like I said, I don't mean that in a negative sense, in the sense that we should just imagine everything that's wrong in our lives, but rather we should substantiate the feelings that we want to feel in the future and the present moment through our imagination. I think this is something I've understood for a while, but I think that the human brain, at least in the physical sense, is supposed to be a problem solver. The quote goes that in times of peace, what was it? It was like in times of peace, the warrior will attack himself. And I think that's very true. I think so often our brains almost tend to make problems for us that aren't really there. And I think that so often our brain, especially in our imagination, tends to focus on the negatives, tends to focus on imagining problems that need to be solved rather than a solution to be experienced. So I'm really just starting to understand that we almost need to shift that in ourselves. We need to start spending more time almost just sitting down and just thinking, sitting down and just imagining what you do want to happen and substantiating those feelings in the present moment. The best example I could give is, when you're in the shower for a while and then you just basically just start imagining like, oh, what if this happens? Oh, what if this happens? Certain situations in school, at least for me, certain situations in our lives that we don't want to happen. Then we start thinking, okay, well, how could I fix this? What could happen as a result? Or even just imagining the past in a sense. Imagining, oh, this person said this to me. Oh, wow, man, I wish I said this instead of this. I wish I had this response. I wish all this happened. But I think it's so important that we focus more on the present and the future rather than on the past and the future. I think it's so important that we focus on what we have right now and we focus on what we can give to ourselves right now. And part of doing that is recognizing what you want in the future and substantiating that in the present moment. I'm starting to understand how much or how valuable it is to really just sit down without going, or I'm really starting to understand how valuable it is to just sit down and just allow yourself to think of what you do want. Imagining it from your own perspective, from your own point of view, exactly what you do want to happen. I think it's so valuable and almost allowing yourself to feel those emotions in the present moment, just as we do, but typically in a negative sense. Because so often we tend to imagine something that makes us angry and then we end up being angry just based on our imagination. So I think it's important that we almost flip that on its side and start thinking positive and start imagining positive things and starting to experience positive things and substantiating that positivity in our day-to-day lives. I think it's also something that, physically and mentally that can be very beneficial. This was the majority of December. I stopped around like December 20th or so. But I wanted to just see what would happen if for a month I didn't listen to any music, I didn't watch any TV, I didn't go on social media, I didn't watch any YouTube, anything like that. I just wanted to see what would happen for a month. And instead I spent that time dedicated to myself. I spent that time, the time that I usually spend, scrolling or watching a video or like listening to some music that like I wouldn't really be thinking about. What if I just spent that time thinking by myself? I spent that time sitting in my own thoughts. And, just from doing that, even though I only did it for about 20 days or so, I realized how much more relaxed you become. And obviously, this is just anecdotal, so I guess you won't really believe me unless you try it for yourself. But when I say, I'm really just starting to understand how everything in our life, even though it's supposed to be entertaining, and I guess it is to an extent, it's pleasurable, but it's not really peaceful. So often the things in our lives that we think, oh, I'm resting, I'm taking a break by watching social media. Oh, I'm taking a break by listening to this song. Oh, I'm taking a break from doing this. I'm taking a break by doing that. I think that those things honestly take away from our ability to rest as a whole. Even in, people often think that imagining something is effort, imagining something is laborious, but it's actually more of a resting process than you going on scrolling on social media. And I think it just makes sense if you think of it from a logistics standpoint. in the sense that social media is a platform, or social medias are platforms where you end up exposing yourself to hundreds of different people, hundreds of different perspectives, hundreds of different, voices. And I think that in doing so, we almost cloud our own voice. And in doing so, we're almost overloading our brain more so than if we just allowed ourselves to think freely. We just allowed ourselves to think for ourselves. So I'm really just trying to understand how important it is that we actually just spend the time and we almost just substantiate the positivity that we want to see in the present moment. And I know it's a bit hard too, because it's also a lot of it is about almost ignoring the physical world when you're not imagining something. But it's almost, I think that's almost a prerequisite in order to achieve what you wish to achieve. In the sense that, the way I understand it is that we should pray, we should fast, and we should have absolute faith in God after we have done those things. And part of having that faith is experiencing the gratitude as if you already had that thing, even if in the physical world you don't have it yet. I think part of having that faith is literally feeling that you have that thing before you have it. I've mentioned this in a different video, but there were so many times when I was younger when, let's say that the microwave wasn't working or something. And then the adults in my life, they'd tell me, like, oh, your words are powerful. You shouldn't say that it isn't working. You should just say that it is working. And then, and I'd just go from there. And I didn't really understand it at the time. But I'm starting to understand now how important it is, not only the words that we say, because I think the words that we say are important, but I think what's more important is the words that we allow to impede in our hearts, the words that we allow to stay in our hearts. So, and I think that so often just from social media and seeing around all these different voices, all these different opinions, we tend to allow that voice to get mudded. We almost tend to forget that we get to decide what we think about. We get to decide how we feel. So I'm just starting to understand how important it is that we substantiate that positivity that we want to see in that moment. We start to see ourselves how we want to see ourselves rather than how the outside world sees us. And we start to feel and we start to experience that gratitude. And in doing so, we almost become more, not only to become more like ourselves, but we end up being more peaceful. We end up being more at rest. And we tend to just be more calm. And we tend to just be happier people. I think that so often part of the reason why we look as our childhood is such like a golden age in our lives is almost because we did not, or we were not able to have all these voices clouding our heads. All these voices impeding in our hearts. We allowed ourselves to just experience what we wanted to experience. We allowed ourselves to be bored and to imagine things. Imagining what we want. Oh, what if this happened? Oh, what if this happened? And I think that as we grow up, we tend to forget that we have that ability at any point in time. But it is something that can be trained, and it is something that I think should be trained. And, when I say trained, people often think it's a laborious thing, but I don't mean in that sense. I mean in the sense just doing it enough and almost allowing yourself to enjoy it enough that you end up doing it more. I almost forgot this sounds a bit crazy, but I almost forgot that I don't always have to be on my phone. And I don't mean that in the sense that, like, oh, I was on my phone so much I forgot that, like, oh, I could go without it. That's not what I mean. But I mean in the sense that if there's downtime, I think that so often it could feel a bit awkward to almost just put your phone away and just sit there. In almost any situation. I've experienced this in school, while traveling, all these things. But I'm starting to understand how losing that ability to put it away and just to think during your downtime, just allowing yourself to imagine during that downtime, it's such a beneficial thing for yourself. It makes you more relaxed, and it just substantiates that positivity that you want to see in the present moment. And you allow yourself to carry that positivity through the rest of the day. So I'm really just starting to understand how important it is that we just allow ourselves to imagine what we want more rather than what we don't want. We allow ourselves to spend time with ourselves. And we allow ourselves to be an influence on our own hearts rather than constantly being influenced by the external world. And in doing so, I think that we become more rested and more happier people. So, I have a Bible verse that goes to the topic of this video. It's taken from Proverbs 4, verse 23. And it says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. I have used this Bible verse in a different video, but I think it still really applies here because it is a bit of a similar topic. It's really just about substantiating the positivity that you want to see in your own imagination and existing within that positivity, existing within that imagination. And in doing so, I think that that's part of what allows it to happen in real life. Because it almost avoids the whole imposter syndrome where you work hard for something or you undergo the process to achieving something. Then you finally achieve it and then you think that, oh, I'm not a person that can achieve this. And in doing so, you're almost blocking yourself from achieving more. So it's really about changing our self-concept through our imagination, that we are fully capable of whatever we desire. And in doing so, you're almost allowing that to happen in your physical world, even if there's no evidence of it yet. And I think that's what faith is. Faith is the belief in things not seen, believing that God will give to you what you work for, as long as it aligns with His will, of course. So I'm really just starting to understand how important it is that, if we want to be a certain person, it's not just about praying to God that we are that person, but it's really about starting to see yourself as that person. I think that's the work that goes along with the faith that allows it to happen. So, I hope you took something from this video. Yeah, thank you for watching.